Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. Since I've started this podcast, I've had the honor to come into contact with a number of wonderful people. Many of them have asked me for help, and in many cases, they have helped me. But a lot of people are really suffering from grief and dark conditions that are very difficult. And so I wanted to spend an episode on how to turn any dark condition into a healing light, how to transform these dark, shadowy experiences and dark energies and emotions and transform them into a healing light. There is a great and timeless truth hidden in this statement that follows. Within it, we discover not only why we continue to have the dark moments in our lives that we do, but also how we can use this very unhappiness to lead us to true self-victory. Once we realize that this truth tells us about our relationship with the unseen universe around us and within us, we have come upon the power we need. The power we need to turn any pressing dark condition into a present and healing light. We are the subject of all that we have yet to realize and the object of all that we have realized. We will focus our attention on the first portion of this truthful idea. We are the subject of all that we have yet to realize. To help us understand this, let's first look over a few simple examples of how it works in our everyday affairs. We begin by restating the idea. We, you and me, are the subject of any physical relationship we are in that we don't understand. Perhaps the most obvious of these examples can be found in any form of addiction we may have had or that we are struggling with at present. To begin with, no one who understands the actual nature of an addictive substance agrees to a relationship with it. Why? Because this person would realize in advance of his actions that to interact with any such substance is to become its slave, little more than an unwilling servant of what he originally thought would serve him. Without such knowledge, he becomes possessed by what he engages instead of being its possessor. In the world of everyday finance, for instance, if we spend our wages chasing those endless objects of our desires, preferring short-term excitement over long-term security, aren't we subjected to the stress born out of spending more than we earn? Of course. Here, more often than not, we find ourselves a kind of slave to the very possessions we dreamed would serve us. What has happened? These highly deceptive impulses to shop till we drop promise us greater personal pleasure, even certain kinds of freedom, but their final result is to deliver us into the hands of debt with its attending stressful states of fear or worry. Another example, if we haven't realized how our spouse or fellow workers, our children, or even our pets know exactly what buttons to push to get us to perform according to their demands, then we belong to them each time this happens. Again, it is our own unseen mechanical reactions that give them the strings to our mind and heart, transforming us into their unwilling puppets. So it is a law. Whatever we have yet to understand about any given relationship in life is the degree to which we find ourselves the subject of that relationship. And all of our relationships with the world have their beginnings within us. Incidentally, though much to the point, on the flip side of this coin that represents our present level of understanding, we are in effect in command of any level of understanding that rests beneath our own. As just one example of this truth, considers that whenever two people meet, one will always naturally be in charge of the other, as this relationship is determined by which of the two individuals better understands the invisible workings of his own nature. These valuable findings bring us to the purpose of this. We are preparing to shine a much needed light upon our dark inner states. And according to the clarity of our insight, become empowered to dismiss unnecessary suffering to which they subject us. When we don't understand our negative states, when we have yet to realize how they trick us into doing their bidding, they have the power to make us jump through hoops like circus animals. As Neville Goddard says, we are all just passing through different states. You really can't judge anybody. They're just in a state. So when you're in that dark state, you find yourself doing these things, and it's ridiculous. It's not a pretty picture in which to see ourselves. But we must not turn our eyes away from these truths that are self-evident. When we are dominated by any negativity, be it some consuming fear or heated anger, we may think we are in command of ourselves as we rush to judgment or lash out at the world. But a simple question reveals another reality. Who, in his or her right mind, purposely sets themselves on fire? The answer is obvious. No one deliberately defeats one's own best self-interests. This much we all realize as being true. But what we don't understand yet is how we are getting tricked into serving these dark states. Anytime we are taken over by a negative state, we suffer. In a flash, natural intelligence is replaced by ignorance. Healthy flexibility turns into destructive rigidity. The fiery essence of these disabling forces imposes their will upon our own, and in a heartbeat, our own actions can be unrecognizable even to us. In short, to be in spiritual darkness is to hurt. It's that simple. When some inner turmoil captures us, the problem is that we will do almost anything to escape it. In the past, what I would do when I had that deep inner turmoil is I would drink to forget about it. And sometimes it took a lot of alcohol to forget about that inner turmoil, but it didn't go away. Many of us do other things to try to forget. We play video games, we distract ourselves, but we ignore it. We don't deal with it. And while this reaction makes sense on the surface of things, it's human nature to run like crazy from anything that has the power to make us hurt. The truth of the matter is a different story entirely. We can never escape any dark state that we run from because it's impossible to outrun the shadow of our own misunderstanding. Think this truth through for yourself and contrast its finding with the following facts. As any negativity starts to overcome us, our usual first response is to find a way to escape our rapidly growing discontent. In no time at all, we come upon some mental course to set our compass by and then go in action. In each instance, our habitual behavior can only mean one thing: something within us, some unseen part of us, is insisting that we do understand our pain. But the truth is, we don't. We must not fear or dismiss this new and true understanding, as our suffering can only come to an end when we end our unconscious identification with the negative states responsible for it and change our state. Oftentimes we cannot change our state as long as we're still identifying with the negative state that is responsible. The only way to bring an end to our relationship with these unwanted inner states is to become wiser than they are. These states are living things. How is this done? We enter into a whole new conscious relationship with them, one that is based upon what we know is true about them, instead of making our choices based upon what these states have told us is true about us. Now, rather than run from or fight with the punishing presence of some challenging or negative state, Our new choice is to consciously challenge its right to our life. I know a lot of people will say, just go into the other state, but it is not that easy. For many, these states become a part of the nervous system, programmed into our neurology. Instead of closing our eyes and going into daydreams of a better world to come, we deliberately come wide awake and allow that worried world pressing in against us to show us its stuff all the time. Perhaps you're thinking, who in his right mind would choose to engage such a formidable enemy? Particularly one that has proven itself time and again not only superior to our wish for simple self-command, but that sometimes outweighs our own best instincts. It is our largely unconscious consideration of this pivotal question, along with what amounts to our foregone conclusion, that brings our study here full circle. Do you see what is being revealed here? Dark inner states, dark shadows, win the day from us before we even know there's been a contest for control of our lives. They just seep in. How can we hope for victory when we have been tricked into surrendering ourselves before an actual engagement has occurred? And in case you're thinking this isn't true, please consider how we invariably submit to these negative states in one of two ways. First, we either fear the power and try to escape their wrath by hiding from them, or sometimes we just simply deny that they exist. Or second, no less counterproductive in the long run, we embrace the guidance these destructive thoughts and feelings offer us as to how we can escape their punishment by following the rescue plans that these states give us. An act not too dissimilar from asking the fox to guard the chicken coop. In either case, what should be clear is that dark inner states win their victory over us because we believe in them. More to the point, we believe in the illusions they create within us without seeing that these same mistaken beliefs then shape the structure of our reality. When we assume a state, as Neville Goddard has explained, that state expresses the outer reality. Someone might say, hey, but wait, my pain is an illusion. Or of course, I've heard someone say, my fears are real. I'm scared about this. Or one of the classics, I suffer from anxiety attacks. I can't help it. I maybe take some medication for it. But if you had an anxiety attack like mine, you would sing a different tune. No one is saying that our various dark inner states aren't real, and those who claim otherwise deceive themselves. That's what I'm talking about. Try to say that, oh, this state is not real. There is a bridge that we have to go through to move from the dark inner state outside of that state. And part of it is acknowledging its existence. Such darkness is a reality, including the shadowy creatures dwelling within it. But the key to understand here is that this reality called darkness is itself just an effect of a far and away greater reality, the light. Here is what we're missing, for which we have been searching all along. Darkness, in whatever form we experience it, from a simple black, starless night to a depressed thought or feeling, only exists in the absence of light. And the more clearly we can see the truth of this principle, regardless of the world in which it's expressed, the greater our potential to realize its power. For instance, in moments where any dark state appears within us, be it in the shape of fear, a worry, or a hatred of where life has led us or a particular person, we must see that the reason its power grows over us as it does is because in the same time and space within our soul, there is no light present in those moments of fear and worry and hate. Let's state this a little differently, perhaps a little more accurately. There is no awareness of the presence of light in us in these dark moments, because if there were, the punishing presence of that dark, shadowy inner state would not be the sole basis of our reality. The true solution for bringing an end to suffering unconsciously, it rests in your hands. The power that is needed to release ourselves from unhappy moments is in the light of our new understanding as to how dark states keep us in the dark. In other words, to know the truth of them is our triumph over them. And we must take these truths into action. Escaping from these dark inner states and understanding them properly will be the key to entering into the new earth, which is being created with every thought of everybody on the earth. So as a study, in summary of what we've talked about so far, there's 7 special lights. Learning to call upon the new understanding they contain and reveal is all the help you need to dismiss any dark, inner, shadowy state. No negative state has the right to reside within you. It doesn't have the right. It's not guaranteed to be there. Maybe you should be depressed, but it doesn't have to be there, and can only dwell there if it tricks you into lending it a dark room in which to stay. There's some part of that state that has convinced you this is how you should feel. It feels very natural, right? The light is all the might you need to successfully turn away any dark inner visitor. Your true wish to understand a negative state initiates the entrance of that specialized light you need to make this same wish come true. We suffer what we do, as we do, only through our unconscious consent. So the first step in freeing ourselves from unseen sorrow is to deliberately bring ourselves into conscious awareness of its dark presence within us. Never accept the presence of any suffering state for the reason it provides. It is possible to understand any negative state out of existence. The more you understand the state, eventually it goes away. Your created nature is a blend of shadows and light that creates them. But your true nature, your original essence, is a light that has no shadow. I get a lot of questions about how to nullify these states with new knowledge. Someone might say, I really have a difficult time dealing with negative states. And they've asked me, do you have any suggestions for what I can do to escape these dark feelings that overtake me so often? And I would say even the best of us have these dark feelings. Simply because I talk about these sort of things doesn't mean I am not exposed to it all the time. It is part of being human. One of the hardest things to understand about the spiritual path and the struggles along the way is that the inner battle we fear losing has already been won for us, if we will choose the right side of the engagement. Our task is to stay in the battle long enough to see through the wrong parts of ourselves that are producing both the negative states and the experiences these states produce. If you will learn what it means to endure until the end, or to stay awake to those states until they pass, which they must, being the mechanical forces they are, you will find yourself on the next step of the path above you, moving into a higher level of consciousness in a different state. You'll know you went higher because you saw through and let go of the lower state. Here's a clue as to how this will work for you as you do this necessary work. Negative states linger only as long as they are fed. It is a fact that no negative spirit or thought can stand alone. This is one of the most empowering inner discoveries a person can make along the path. This realization is why we must learn to be alone, and at the same time, why, if we will accept the truth of what we see within ourselves, we are simultaneously set free from both state and from the self and the ego. I had a friend ask the other day, when I try to walk away from my familiar sense of self, which I tend to be a bit brooding, it seems like my world turns dark. I think and feel this darkness in me in a literal sense, And even worse, I can see its effects on others around me. But I have no sense of balance or direction in these times. I feel lost. I feel like there's no hope when I'm in these dark states. What is going on? This is a tough question. Have you ever gone into a darkened room and not been able to turn on the light? And then if you stayed there, you gradually began to be able to see what you formerly were unable to see. A natural part of you, asleep at first, was able to awaken and given you night vision. This is a parallel. Remain conscious of this darkness. Don't let yourself derive a sense of self from it. Don't say that is me. The light will come. Then you will know what to do in all such instances. Someone else said, I'm starting to think it would be a good idea for me to learn something about anger, as it always catches me off guard, whether the outburst is in another person or myself. What are these secret fires that live in all of us, and should we seek out angry situations to better understand them? I had this discussion when somebody said, hey, we don't want to ignore our shadow states, so should I focus on my anger and really study it to understand it? And that's a legitimate question when we're saying before that we can't just ignore it. Our work must be with what is, not with what isn't. And what this means is that to go out looking for self-destructive negative states is like seeking your own hand. These conditions coexist with this life as it presently is, so we mustn't go out to find suspected self-defeating states. You're not going to do shadow work by looking for the anger or the hate, but learn to bear consciously their appearance within ourselves when they surface. You'll know it when it surfaces within you, not when you go looking for it. Life provides the field. We just have to be there. As for some indicators of anger to watch for, like smoke before the fire, learning to observe impatience and intolerance of ourselves and others will ultimately prove rewarding. Watch these states closely. They will show you what sits beneath. That is why being the neutral observer is so important, so that you can monitor your own states as the neutral observer. Do we have power just to eliminate dark emotions when they come up? One of the most popular questions I get, which is very common for people that are going through spiritual awakenings, is that I'm lonely. Help me to overcome my loneliness. How do I abolish this loneliness, this dark feeling of loneliness? And I totally understand. I did an episode on loneliness in awakening. Check that episode out. But just remember that loneliness is not the problem. Fear of loneliness is what drives us into wrong relationships, including despairing of ourselves. How many of you have seen that person that settled for a terrible relationship just because they wanted to avoid loneliness? Think about it. The feeling of being alone has no negative content in and of itself, but as the mind works on it and brings to bear all of the past negative experiences about being lonely, suddenly loneliness turns from a lamb into a lion. We can never be free of any negative state without being willing to meet it, to see it fully. Negative states continue to win the day in our lives because they know we won't look at their face. One great spiritual secret is that we will dare negative states to do their worst to us. God will take our defense. This means we will see through that state. Another question I get is, it seems to me the more I try to work at being a better person, the more alone I feel. What's this all about? The more I awaken spiritually, the more work I do spiritually, the more I meditate, I become more alone. And I know it seems strange and even unfair that our efforts to be true human beings, to be better human beings, to be moving into a higher spiritual realm, we often feel as though we are being punished. You ever hear the expression from the New Testament, "Blessed are ye that are reviled in my name"? Christ told his disciples this, but what isn't specifically stated in the Bible is that this is both an outer expression of a person's work and an inner one. This is important. The pain we feel, whether it's aloneness or emptiness, fear, or whatever that arises as a result of our efforts to win. Life is not an effect of that life per se, but a kind of reprisal from our old nature, who uses the only weapon available to keep us in line. As this truth gets clear to you, your intolerance with these kinds of inner threats will grow. One day, you'll laugh in the face of all such painful feelings, and your laugh will be rooted in reality. Someone said, I'm in a situation with two competing fears, the fear of being alone for the rest of my life and the fear of approaching and speaking to someone new. Any action I take seems to be giving into one of these fears. And this is so common. I know that people are afraid to meet people and they're afraid to be alone at the same time. And what is the way out of that? And I would say try to see that it isn't being alone that frightens you. What is scaring you is the movie that runs within the theater of your mind called My Life Alone. The only way out of this movie is to go into aloneness. Understand that the fear you feel about it is a lie. If you'll do this, the movie ends, and with it, the wonder and pleasure of what real aloneness brings. Another question is, what is a source of severe depression? And what is the most effective way to begin attacking it? We get people in the group that talk about their dark depressions all the time. I see it in chat, and I want to help. We have to see the big picture in order to succeed with our wish for freedom from any state. All things physical have gravity. This includes thought forms and emotional energies. All thought forms and their accompanying energies operate under the law of association and attraction. Depression begins with an unconscious act of identifying with certain images about ourselves. These images or ideas usually have to do with pictures we hold in our mind about what we are supposed to be or what we're supposed to accomplish in this life. The problem with this set of ideas is they don't belong to us. They are in effect of the world, of the pendulum we live in, whose nature it is to measure ourselves by values passed along by others. When we compare ourselves unconsciously to these ideas and fail to measure up, it just drives the circle of self, the circle of ego. First, this nature looks for itself, and failing to find what it's looking for, it simply returns to its own content for another answer, which is always part of the problem and never the solution. Now multiply this, and you will understand severe depression. Since this negative state enters us and takes possession of us in our unawareness, new awareness is the solution in order to see what we must about this false sense of self. It is necessary to investigate it instead of giving ourselves over to it. Don't fight with it. Add as much light or awareness to it as you can, and it will begin to lose hold on you. A lot of times, people that are in depression are caught in that moment of that dark feeling. But if you really spend some time analyzing why you're depressed, take some time to think about it, analyze it, sometimes that will alleviate much of what you're experiencing. And as you lose interest in this negative state, in the sense of your attachment to it and what it provides you, the state will dwindle away into its native darkness. No longer a problem for you because you're no longer a place in which it can dwell. And then there's the question about loss and grief. And these are the hardest. And some of the stuff I hear in spiritual and New Age circles is ridiculous. I've lost people in my life, and there's no way around it. It's a natural state to feel these dark emotions. Someone asked me, what, if any, is the relationship between this growing sense of sadness I'm experiencing and my growing love of truth? Telling me that the more they understand the truth, the more they become sad. This sadness appears along the way and it belongs mostly to the lower aspects of the self and the ego that are unable to take that next step. It's really all about the self. What this self grieves over is not what it says it does, but in the end of itself. On the other hand, as we awaken and see the unnecessary pain and strife in our fellow creatures, there is born in us a certain kind of sadness over this great waste. This new empathy, which feels like sadness at first, signals the birth of compassion. A lot of people have asked questions in the Facebook group. I see the world. I don't know what to do. I don't believe we're able to solve this. There's so much chaos, so much violence. What do we do? And as the new earth awakens and we become more empathic, literally feeling the feelings of everybody around us, we will start to feel these dark states that other people have entered into. And the question is, what are you going to do with it? As you enter into this sadness, it can become the birth of compassion, where you feel compassion for someone else. You don't have to enter into their state, but you feel compassion for it. And oftentimes, it's a signal that you can be of service somehow to help them alleviate the state they're in. I was asked a question the other day, and it really made me think about how ridiculous sometimes some spiritual teachings are when they ignore the truth of a situation. Somebody said, I've read that grief over loss of a loved one is only suffering of the false self and ego. If so, is there such a thing as grief that does not include the idea of loss? And I say, don't believe all that you read. There's such a thing as natural grief. Losing a loved one, a truly loved one, cannot go without effect. There is no way to avoid it. The key here is to be awake and not take part in grieving over one's self at the loss of another. If you're saying, poor me, this person died, that's the part that you need to change. This is where the grief is not only a lie, but it's unnatural and leads to long-term unhappiness in the continual reliving of the loss. I lost this person, woe is me. Not woe is them, but woe is me. There are certain invisible laws in this world that we've discussed on this podcast multiple times. One of them being that everything passes, no exceptions. And when we invest our sense of self in that which passes, when that thing, possession, or person changes, we feel a fear and then a sense of loss because we have mistaken its life for our own, and suffering follows. Many of those cases, the person that you've lost would not want you to suffer in a negative state. But it's natural to go through that process. Another thing is when somebody loses somebody they love, somebody has a breakup. That's when I've been so depressed. When I've lost somebody I truly loved and I wanted to give up on everything. And I have people contact me and I feel your pain. I know how you feel. Someone said, someone I was deeply in love with has left me after several years and I'm crushed. I've dated others, but none will ever compare. Nobody will ever be as good. How can I pull myself out of these obsessive thoughts about what I once had that was so perfect? And I understand you will look back on that relationship as if it was perfect, but it probably wasn't. But the sense of self that any suffering produces is guaranteed to find ways to continue that same suffering. Understand the role of the self in your suffering. Try to see when these sad thoughts come to you and invite you into their world, that they're always promising you something. Connect the pain that follows your entrance into their world with their presence, and eventually you will see through these lies. To help you refuse these insidious invitations, ask yourself repeatedly, what good is anything I may possess that when I no longer have it, I no longer have myself? Stay with this question and its intent until something in you awakens that wants its own life more than the false life provided for it through temporary conditions. Nobody is going to cure you. No past relationship will fix you. This discussion of this episode reminded me of another comment that I had on a YouTube video where somebody said they had been a Christian almost all their lives, and a few years ago that they had open heart surgery which caused a stroke, and they couldn't do their job. And they ended up losing the job, and they were really good at it and enjoyed it thoroughly. Asked me to help imagine for them. They said they felt like Job in the Bible and that they had lost everything because the one thing they did best was taken away from them. And I can understand if somebody said, you can't talk anymore, I would very much be frustrated because I couldn't do this podcast. And I'm sure that other people have things that could be taken away from them. So I'm not downplaying it. The person said they always heard that when God closes one door, he opens another, that old cliche, but they find themselves getting down and not knowing which way to turn. They say they try to keep their faith. They listen to the podcast. They know all the things, but they feel like they're losing. And they say, I know I need to live in the present moment. I know I need to forget about the self, but it's so hard to do. I know that you might have even thought that as I was discussing how to overcome these dark emotions. I believe that God never forsakes the soul that loves him, ever. The problem is our souls, as they are presently, lack spiritual understanding for many. We think we are who we think we are. We think we are this body. We think we are this life. And these thought-constructed natures, these images we hold of ourselves, are in a form of enmity with God. For these reasons, when God gives himself to us, we often don't understand the gift. Take Job, for instance. His trials and willingness to endure them, in spite of everything, did not confuse his love for the Almighty, because he knew in his heart that God is good. Sure, his tests may be tough, but whatever reason, God only gives us tough tests to those who need to be tougher. Another person asked, why did God in his infinite wisdom create a situation for humankind that would allow so much pain and suffering watching the news? This is a very common question, and apart from evil, suffering is the least understood subject in the world. You may have to ponder this for a while, but think on this idea. Has not the suffering of someone you love not invited you to make a change for the better, if not actually led you to that change? Nurture your unshakable true nature. Someone sent me another note asking, I'm unhappy with my weight gain, lack of exercise, and I'm not able to change it. Every time I start to make progress, a setback comes along and brings me back to square one. And I'm always doubting myself, I always hate myself. What should my attitude be towards these setbacks? It's possible for us to learn to use anything. Everything can be used. That's been the secret of my self-awakening. One of the biggest tricks of our negative states is they secretly conspire to convince us that what is all there can be. When we're in those states, we don't think there's any way out. And this conclusion belongs to those who have been and can't touch who we may become if we will just gather ourselves up and start life all over again. Remember that who we really are is always becoming whatever we agree to be. So don't allow who you have been in the past to draw you into agreeing to the same. Another question I got was, I know there must be a relationship between good health physically and true spiritual principles, but what part does truth play when it comes to our healing? Everything is in levels, and when it comes to our bodies, healthful and true dietary and physical regimens are important, especially when we're talking about these states. You may have a state that's completely tied to your physical body and the condition that you're in health-wise, but the real issue rests with invisible forces operating beneath or beyond the physical, always. No body can be any healthier than the energy it conducts and embraces. In the long run, real health is a question of relationship. Our task is to wake up to those unhealthy inner relationships we presently are involved in so that in discovery of them, they can be replaced with higher and more balanced elements. Healing naturally follows each new healthy step, what we'll take in this manner, and incidentally, healing is in scale, not only as it concerns our physical well-being, but our spiritual nature as well. Another question is, I'm in physical pain and not in control of my body. Is there something I can do to ease the seeming anxiety. I would say in one sense, everything about this life is a kind of preparation for death. And this death that is inevitably physical is one indicator that we should be using its long shadow to find ways to stand in the light. And as strange as it seems, it is this fear or resistance to our own physical end that perpetuates our painful relationship with it. It is hard to understand, but if we will not run from this fear, but rather become intimate with it, we will grow so tired of being afraid that we will die to the fear. Dying to this fear is the real beginning of dying to death. This is something you cannot have explained to you, but rather it is a bold inner requirement we are all given the opportunity to realize. If we will refuse to run from the battle we face, whatever it may be, victory appears. Another question I got was, increasingly I hear strange ideas like I should learn how to embrace my own pain or walk into my own shadow self. Does this mean to accept the very unhappiness that I'm working so hard to be free of? Accepting any negative state does not mean welcoming it. It means to allow life to teach you what it wants you to learn through whatever relationship there may be at that moment. Life is not throwing questions at us. It is giving us answers. This is one of the greatest secrets I have ever found. Real answers are complete. Our task is to start understanding this. If you will do your inner work, you will be shown everything you need to know. Another person asked, I can make myself sick with just a simple thought of a certain painful memory crossing my mind. Is there a way to diffuse the hurt instead of sinking into it? The next time some hostile state takes over your life, either in thought, as in remembering something someone did to you in the past, or in an actual moment of conflict with someone standing before you, ask yourself the following question. At the moment, you can remember yourself to do this. Is this self that I am presently experiencing the me that I want to be? Or is this suffering self how I want to know myself? And then just come as awake as you can to the realization that you are not who you want to be at that moment, but that something foreign to your true nature has imposed itself on you and taken over your life. Then once having done this, do nothing else except realize that while you may be temporarily powerless to stop the lower state from possessing you, you are empowered to recognize the negative state as an intruder. This awareness, this conscious awareness of your true pained condition is what it means to put the light on the problem. That is your job. The light will do its part if you will do yours. Persist until you are free. Then there's the issue of just communicating with people that intimidate you and create these negative emotions. Someone said, before speaking to someone who intimidates me, I sometimes feel my throat start to close up and my voice choke up with so much tension that I find it hard to speak. I've got to get behind this fear, but I don't know how. One way in which it's possible for us to outgrow the problems that we face is to not let those problems dictate our behavior to us. In this instance, whenever we run into areas that are challenging, a part of us will urge us to avoid those situations that make us feel uneasy. The answer is to go into the problem, not let the problem take us away from seeing its real cause. Don't run away from it. The wrong parts of us are always defining us according to their secret limitations. In this instance, anything that we fear or that makes us behave oddly or weird will tell us that it's the person or the situation that is causing the conflict. We must always remember that in all circumstances, our situation is ourselves, and that it is through direct contact with these parts and doing what they fear to do that will prove to us there was nothing real in the fear. All fear, all negative states are conditional. This means that if we will stay the course and be willing to remain aware of ourselves while these parts are threatening us, we'll see them fade and disappear. That is freedom. Someone says, I have a lot of fears about an event I'm planning. What to serve? Who to invite? How do I know if these fears are irrational or if I should listen to the voice that is telling me not to hold the event at all? That was actually something I said to myself. All psychological fears are in a sense irrational. All fear is not rational. Start there. If you want to have a party, have it. But don't let the party, any part of it, be at your spiritual expense. There are two ways to proceed, and both require inner work. Have the party in exactly who you want to come to it, exactly the way you want it, but make up your mind that you will not entertain tormenting inner guests as you make your preparations. Do this and you will learn more about yourself than you would if you decided not to have the party, or cancel the party and watch for the same uninvited inner guests. Another common question is, whenever bad news arrives on telephone or mail or on TV, I face fear. My heart pounds, I forget everything true and find myself right back where I started. What can I do? Strangely, waking up to discover that we have forgotten what we thought we knew is the beginning of a new and higher kind of knowing. For many years, we meet thought with thought, events with right principles, but higher thoughts and right principles are still the same level as the attacking state. We must learn this the hard way, which gradually allows us to stop fighting, stop resisting these negative states. We're not trying to learn how to overpower darkness. We're learning to dwell inwardly where darkness can't touch us. Another common question is, I have terrible anxiety triggered by worry that challenges the way I take care of my kids, my job, my outside interests. And what can I do to work through this anxiety? Anxiety is one of the more difficult internal states to work with because of the way it works within us. The key is to begin realizing that the only influence any anxious state can have over us is in what it promises us we will have if we will do what the state tells us to do. One of the important aspects of your inner work is to begin learning deeply to recognize these individual states as they invade your psychic system. And in the beginning, if nothing else, to meet these states, especially anxiety, with what you know is true about the state instead of listening to what the state tells you is true. The truth wants you to understand that anxious states live for themselves at your expense. The clearer this becomes to you, the freer you will be from giving yourself away to any anxious state. Also, I find that anxiety can be a plus. If I have anxiety, I know that's a new energy, and I can use that energy if I funnel that energy through my chakras. Just today I got an email that said, with wars raging and me in the middle of it all, will my spiritual work lift me out of the clutches of this dismal place, this planet that is heading into oblivion? This is a very common question because it's easy to look at the world and see that bad things are happening. Freedom from this raging planet with all of its wars, pandemics, begins with discovering and walking away from the war within ourselves. In truth, there is no other battle, and what we see around us is the inevitable expression of the pain within us that pushes and pushes until it finds some release. As far as where your spiritual work leads you, leave it to the Spirit. It will never betray you. I had another question the other day. What is it that keeps people in their psychic sleep? Does the devil or any spiritual force contribute to this? It's easy to see that people are zombified by the pendulums around them. And yes, there are deliberate forces inherent as themselves and dwelling in matter that work to keep us asleep, to keep us in a trance state, away from the truth. Try not to divide this idea up into parts, but see it as a whole. Everything wants to remain as it is. Everything wants life. This includes those forces and spirits whose life depends upon keeping us from seeing the truth. Someone else says, if evil forces need my unconscious cooperation in order to steal my life and manifest themselves through me, why are they dedicated to my destruction? It's an interesting question. If evil forces are there, why do they want to destroy me? I know that it seems on the surface things to be a lose-lose situation for the darkness, but you must understand certain aspects of the scale. Even the virus that would consume the human body doesn't perish when the body it has consumed does, for it belongs to a deeper order of life that is, in a sense, eternal relative to the temporary forms in which it thrives. The same holds true with negative forces. Someone else said, is it true that when we place ourselves along the higher path and begin to make real progress, evil deliberately tries to sabotage our spiritual efforts? I've heard this many times when I was in a devout Christian relationship. The person that I was with believed the more spiritual you are, the more bad things will happen to you because the devil will challenge you. And yes, our work to embrace the light naturally attracts opposing forces. However, there are spiritual truths that can transform these seeming adversaries into emissaries of the very light we seek. For now, remember and work with the following idea. When any darkness comes upon us and attacks our wish for a holy life, it always betrays itself by revealing itself. In each of these revelations, if we are awake, comes the collapse of where we were consciously and unconsciously in relationship with these dark forces. Another common sentiment is it's so much work to do, to be good, and so easy to fall prey to these dark forces, wanting us to stay asleep. Doesn't this make it seem that darkness is somehow more powerful, more natural even than light? I see this a lot when people discuss the negative polarity in the law of one, and they act like the service to self is so powerful and the service to others isn't. Try to understand we are in a physical realm in physical bodies, and both of which are under certain laws, gravity, that make it easier for things to fall down than to rise up. This physical condition and its inherent darkness, that is an effect of being clothed in matter, is not the ruling power for anyone wishing to rise above himself. The only power that darkness has is in the absence of the light. The only thing most of us know to do when life takes an unwanted turn, bringing us what we don't want, is to take a turn for the negative ourselves. And when the circumstance in question really makes a wreck of things, not only do we summarily reject the event seen at cause, but for good measure, we often will turn our wrath upon our own lives, pronouncing them not worth living. Such flashes of frustration, born from our growing sense of futility, make sense of the surface of things and even seem curative to the self that feels so impossibly stuck. But a closer look proves otherwise. What many have yet understood is that dark, negative reactions to unwanted events do nothing to cure them. In fact, if we're using reality transurfing, the dark negative reaction will create a wave of misfortune. A wave of energy is put out, and we then begin to experience these dark negative reactions and their results around us. They actually cement things, fixing both themselves and the false sense of self through which they are empowered to run their unhappy course. Each negative response that passes unconsciously through us actually confirms its own dark perception that life has done me wrong. But this is only half of its occult operation. This same conclusion of having been somehow victimized by an uncaring world virtually locks the door on the possibility of ever discovering the real lessons and the truth behind these times of trial. Whenever life runs counter to your wishes, try to see what it really isn't life that has denied you your happiness, but the real culprit responsible for darkening the moment is some idea you have about what you need to be happy. I would also suggest everything is working to your advantage meditation in these moments, understanding that your response should be that everything is working to my advantage. It will come to your benefit. Admittedly, this new and higher perception takes courage. It takes courage to think that. Because instead of struggling to change the dark condition called into question, or just silently stewing about it, not telling anybody, but just thinking about it, you must turn and face the false self responsible for this outlook. But the truth is, there really is no alternative. Not if you can see that as long as this demanding self or ego stands unchallenged within you, so will the painful pattern of fighting with unwanted events continue to occur. The next time that life comes knocking with what you don't want, instead of allowing yourself to be dragged through the old round around, make these 3 new choices and watch how they dismiss the darkness knocking at your door. First is to come wide awake to yourself. Remember, Your new aim is not to allow old mechanical reactions to rule the day. To become the neutral observer, then in this awareness of yourself, see that the unpleasantness of the offending moment is not actually in the event itself, but is an effect of resisting your own perception that something has taken away your happiness. The key here to escaping this circle of self-perpetuating punishment is in coming awake to its existence and how not wanting to feel a certain way is giving you the very feeling you don't want. Secondly, stop complaining to yourself about what life has done to you. Every time you complain, you put out that wave of misfortune. All you're really doing is recreating the very dismal state of self you are condemning. Consciously choose to go the other way, which brings us to the third and most important choice. Say yes to life. Instead of blindly refusing moments that seem contradictory to your contentment, then pushing them away, learn how to embrace these unwanted moments. Embrace them and say, everything is working to my advantage. Find the joy in them. Bring them into your real life, into the light of self-awareness instead of trying to get rid of them. Your conscious embrace invites times to tell you about the self. Freedom will follow. There's so much more that I can discuss. I'm sure there's some aspects of dark emotions that I missed here, or grief, but I tried to cover most of it and give you my own interpretation. The truth of it is, this is an ongoing journey for every single one of you, and it can only really be solved and understood by yourself. So shadow work is important, but it is not critical. Understanding these shadows and dark emotions exist without the light is the key. You must bring the light into the situation. Don't ignore it. Don't escape from it, because it will still be there in your subconscious and in your body. Bring it up, acknowledge it, and the more that you become aware of it as the neutral observer, it will not be as big a deal as you think. I wish I could help you more, and I get so many emails and notes. It's impossible for me to answer all of them, but many of them are people that are struggling with these dark emotions, dark energies, and shadows that they're coming to grips with. And it's human nature. It's totally natural. Be happy. That means that you're growing spiritually. And as you understand the role of yourself and the ego, and that you're responsible for the reality that you create, begin to create the reality that you want by imagining the reality that you want and entering into a state that you want. Return to that state like it's the home. The metaphor that Neville Goddard gives is that we go around when we leave the house. We might go to the mall, we might go to a lot of different places, but we always come home at the end of the day. What state are you coming home to at the end of the day? Try not to come home to that negative state. And if you are, then you need to deal with it. Don't just ignore it. I hope this helps. In any case, all episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. Welcome to The Reality Revolution.